You know that phone in your hand? Or the incredible life-saving tech in modern hospitals? Well, what if I told you it all started with a discovery that everyone at the time thought was completely useless? Today, we're diving into the story of the accidental discovery that quietly built our modern world.
All right, so let's set the scene. It's the late 1800s. You've got these scientists in their labs, and they're doing something that seems kind of weird today. They're taking these glass tubes, sucking all the air out to create a vacuum, and then zapping them with electricity. And when they do, this strange glow appears. They called them cathode rays, but honestly, they had no clue what they were looking at. It was a genuine mystery, one of the biggest puzzles of the time.
And this is where our main character enters the picture, a British physicist named J.J. Thomson. He decides to get to the bottom of this. So he starts messing with these rays, right? He zaps them with electricity, he holds magnets up to them, and he just watches. He carefully notes how they bend and move. And after all these clever experiments, he comes to a conclusion that was just mind-blowing. These things weren't rays at all. Nope. They were made of teeny, tiny, individual particles.
And get this, these particles were unlike anything anyone had ever imagined. They were about 2,000 times lighter than a hydrogen atom. Now, you gotta remember, back then, the hydrogen atom was considered the absolute smallest thing in the universe. Thomson had found something inside the atom. He discovered the very first subatomic particle, the electron. And just like that, the entire rulebook of physics was about to be thrown out the window.
But here's the kicker, the really funny part of the story. At the time, nobody thought this was useful at all. Thomson himself couldn't see a single practical use for his discovery. In fact, legend has it that the go-to toast in his lab was, and I love this, "To the electron, may it never be of use to anybody." It just goes to show, for him, this wasn't about building the next big thing. It was just about understanding how the universe worked.
And boy, did it change how we understand the world. I mean, think about this for a second. Right now, you probably feel like you're sitting down, right? You're touching your chair. Well, physics says you're not. Not really. What's actually happening is the electrons in your body are pushing away the electrons in the chair. It's like a tiny force field. You are literally hovering just a tiny, tiny fraction of an inch above the surface. You're not touching it. That's how deep this discovery goes.
So yeah, it was a massive revolution for science. But that was just the beginning. It also kicked off a second revolution, this one in technology, and it was completely unexpected. This useless little particle was about to trigger a domino effect that would literally build the modern world. Nobody saw it coming.
Okay, so the first domino? Electronics. That simple glass tube that Thomson was playing with, the cathode ray tube? Well, it turned out to be the key to the very first electronic screens. For decades, pretty much every home had one. You probably know it as an old-school, bulky television set. And that alone is a huge deal. But believe me, this was just the start. See, that tube was holding another secret. Inside, you've got this beam of electrons flying along. What happens when you make them suddenly slam into a metal plate? Well, all that energy has to go somewhere. And it turns out it gets blasted back out as a super powerful, high-energy kind of light. Today, we call them X-rays. And just think about how fast this happened. The electron is discovered in 1897. Barely 15 years later, this accidental byproduct, X-rays, is being used in hospitals. By World War I, they had mobile X-ray units right there on the battlefield, helping surgeons find bullets and shrapnel inside wounded soldiers, saving who knows how many lives. There is just no way you could have invented that on purpose. You couldn't go to a scientist and say, "Hey, invent me a better surgical probe." It had to be found by pure accidental discovery. So that little tube of Thomson's, it was more than just a tube. It was basically the world's first very simple particle accelerator. And once that door was opened, well, the floodgates just burst open. It created a whole new field of science, all about mastering this invisible, subatomic world. Fast forward to 1928. A physicist named Paul Dirac is just scribbling away at his equations, and the math starts telling him something really weird. The equations basically said that for every particle, there has to be a mirror image twin, an antiparticle. And if they ever touched, they would just annihilate each other in a flash of energy. So based on nothing but math, he predicted an anti-electron, which he called a positron. It sounded like something straight out of science fiction, but guess what? 4 years later, they found it. It was real. So that crazy science fiction idea, yeah, we use it in hospitals every single day now. It's the P in PET scan, positron emission tomography. We literally use antimatter to look inside the human body and spot diseases like cancer. I mean, how wild is that? It went from a weird quirk in an equation to a life-saving medical tool. And we didn't stop there. We can take that same idea, speeding up electrons, but just crank the energy way, way up, like 1,000 times higher. When you do that, the X-rays they produce become so powerful they can actually destroy cancer cells. That's the basis for radiotherapy, a treatment that about half of all cancer patients in places like the UK rely on. It's a true medical power tool.
Okay, but what about something even closer to home? Like the smartphone you're probably watching this on. The computer chips inside that thing are miracles of engineering, and they're built using, you guessed it, a particle accelerator. A process called ion implantation basically shoots atoms into silicon to create all the tiny transistors. So yeah, the legacy of J.J. Thomson's little glass tube is sitting right there in your pocket.
So just how common is this technology that started in a lab a century ago? Well, right now, there are more than 35,000 particle accelerators running in the world, and that's not even counting all the old TVs. From gigantic ones like at CERN hunting for the secrets of the universe, to smaller ones just sterilizing medical supplies, they are, quite literally, everywhere.
Which kind of brings us to the whole point of this story, right? It all makes an incredibly powerful argument for something called curiosity-driven research. You know, the kind of science where you're not trying to solve a specific problem, you're just curious. You're just trying to figure stuff out for the sake of knowing. And there's a really important difference here. Look, applied research is fantastic. We need it. It solves problems, it makes things better bit by bit. But the big stuff, the truly world-changing, revolutionary breakthroughs, those almost always come from pure curiosity. You just cannot schedule a discovery like the electron. It doesn't work that way.
The lesson here, looking back at history, seems pretty clear. When we give smart people the freedom, the time, the money, the space to just follow their curiosity, to chase down those weird little glows in a glass tube, the things they find end up being way more important, way more world-changing than anything we could have ever planned for.
There's a great quote from the writer Jonathan Swift. He said, "Vision is the art of seeing things invisible." And that's exactly what J.J. Thomson did over 100 years ago. He saw the invisible. He peered into the atom. And by doing that, he unlocked a future that he himself could never, ever have predicted. So that leaves us with one last question to chew on. We just saw how one single, supposedly useless discovery ended up giving us, well, everything from TVs and cancer treatments to the computer chip. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the useless research happening right now in some lab somewhere that's quietly getting ready to build the world of tomorrow?